Welcome to Season 2 of Learning and Unlearning. So, in this episode, we aim to unpack mental health in our own generation of men. We're now armed with the language to describe what we're going through and why that should be identified as mental illness. We want to look at the ways in which men from different backgrounds who fall into the millennial generation often express mental health issues through vices such as alcohol, drug use, toxic relationships, and unhealthy consumption of pop culture. In this episode, we speak to a professional psychologist, Kelebogile Mojanaga, who will speak about the trend and the extent to which men are seeking mental health help, assistance, and how young men seem to be taking more initiative. Despite the fact that more and more men are seeking mental health in the form of therapy or counseling, there are still young men who fall through the cracks and never quite seem to get the help they need. We see many of our boys taking their own lives or turning to vices, sabotaging their careers and relationships. How can we spread the language around mental health and make sure that the signs are no longer hidden? So, Lebs, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself before we start?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for the people,
For the people.
These guys know us.
Yes.
They need to know you.
All right, okay, cool. So, my name is Kelebogile Mojanaga, as you've said. In professional spaces, I think I'm more referred to Kelebogile.
This is not a professional thing.
But yeah.
What's your name? Is it Lebohang or Kelebogile?
Kelebogile is my name.
Oh shit!
So we went to varsity with
Oh
Lebo.
damn!
At UB for the first time.
Just realized.
Incidentally, I don't know if you know this, but you're the first person I ever spoke to at Wits. You know that. We were in a line at registration, and I remember thinking, because I was like a head shorter than you, and I remember thinking, she's really tall. And then you turned to me and asked me a question about registration. I was like, I don't know things about stuff.
Oh my goodness,
And
was
you're
that you?
That was me.
I remember that moment, but I don't know who.
It was me. It was absolutely me.
And now you just found out the name.
And now I know your name.
Oh my goodness,
And
I
that
totally
was-
remember that.
That was 9 years ago, or 6, or 7, or 8. But more than
Yeah.
Almost a decade ago.
a shocking amount of time.
Oh my goodness, wow, it's this really small world. Hey?
Nice to meet you, Kelebogile.
Nice. Wow, gee. Thank you for inviting me to your show, guys.
After all these years.
After all these
It's
years.
only fair.
So these are people.
Yes.
Sure.
But I am a clinical psychologist, and I'm currently doing my community service. So I'm working in the clinics, so in the most quite disadvantaged areas. And in terms of my research niche, it's in childhood development.
Wow.
So in terms of motherhood, fatherhood, parenting.
Yeah.
But generally, I enjoy work with children because I feel like as adults, most of the work gets done when we're young. So all of the things that we present with once we're adults are a result of something that we could have intervened at an earlier age.
Absolutely.
So with my work with adults, it's quite informed by all that research in terms of childhood and what could have contributed to how you are in relationships. You know, most of those things form from your childhood. So hence I've really taken an interest in doing research in early childhood development.
So for me, quick question there, Dumi, sorry.
Sure.
I think, please distinguish for the peeps, like, what's the difference between, I guess, a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist,
Or a
etc.,
counseling
a counselor?
psychologist and-
Yes, all those kinds of things. Because I remember,
The major ones.
yes, even there's counselors, there's a counselor at church, etc., etc. So,
Sure.
what roles do they play, and what do you specifically do?
Okay, I think So I think that's a very important question because I've realized that, the word psychologist is used interchangeably with, no, I just need therapy, I need a counselor, I just need therapy. But actually there's quite a big difference. And depending on what the issue is, you need a specific type of a psychologist. So with myself, I'm a clinical psychologist. Okay. So what that means is that I can work in clinical settings. So that's hospitals, that is... mostly hospital psychiatric ones as well. So I also work with clinical diagnoses like your depression, your anxiety. So as a clinical psychologist, I can diagnose that and then also refer then to a psychiatrist. Yeah. So then when the psychiatrist comes along. So with a clinical psychologist, so we study 6 years basically to qualify. So it's your 3 years honors, undergrad, and then you do your honors degree, and then master's is 2 years. So you can't practice as a clinical psychologist without your 6 years of training, without a master's degree, in essence. So that's how we're different. Then with the psychiatrists, they are medical doctors. So they do medicine first, and then...
Specialize in psychiatry.
Yes, and then they specialize in psychiatry. So they're the ones who can then... prescribe medication. So I can't prescribe medication.
But you can refer.
I can refer to
and
them.
Diagnose.
Yes. Okay. So once I see a patient and I'm of the opinion that, they clinically depressed, then I can then refer them to a psychiatrist who will confirm the diagnosis and then put them on treatment if that's the course of treatment we choose.
So is a counseling psychologist less concerned with the pathology of mental illness? Yes. What's the distinction between the clinical and the counseling psychologist?
So a counseling psychologist, they work more in terms of therapy-based work. Okay. So they can provide counseling in that sense, but they're not able to diagnose, but they also can't work with clinical illnesses. Yes. So with psychosocial stresses, like we all go through stress, you can see a counseling psychologist to help you in terms of manage that, and it's therapy. It's therapy. We're all trained in therapy, but I think where our trainings differ is in terms of the clinical work. So in terms of I could work with, the schizophrenic patients, schizophrenia. I can work in actual mental institutions. Where a counseling psychologist can work in a normal, they can have their own practice or even in a hospital setting, but it's more for handling everyday distress that can cause... stress. Or I need someone to talk to and hold me in that way, coping skills. Then you can see a counseling psychologist. So in that way. But then also there's an educational psychologist for more educational developmental kind of needs for children mostly. So there's quite distinguished fields. Even in clinical psychology, but I think it'll be a discussion for another day, but there's different types of therapies as well. So for more short-term based work, you'd probably see a CBT psychologist as well. For more longer term, a psychoanalytic therapist. So there's levels to it, but that's what's always important, not to self-diagnose. I think I need to emphasize this.
Hey, Google.
Yes,
Twitter. We are actually Googling Millennial.
Twitter threads. Let's talk about Twitter threads.
Very important not to do that, because the thing is, in the same way we are different professionals working with different clinical settings, it's not going to be the same for everyone. And depression won't look the same in everyone. So that's why it's important to see the right kind of professional who can administer the right kind of treatment for that kind of diagnosis that you... Even anxiety, many millennials also struggle with anxiety. So you need to see... in most cases, a clinical psychologist, so you can be able to manage and work on some of those.
And ultimately, there's a reason you go to school for 6 years. So don't diagnose yourself. Speak to Lebs. Lebs, tell us, how are mental health issues normally diagnosed? What's the process of diagnosing a mental health issue? Or mental illness, sorry.
Okay. So, in our context, I've realized that most cases, people seek... counseling or are curious about their diagnosis if they hit crisis. Something has happened, a big trauma has happened, or they're suicidal, or literally something significant in their lives has happened, then they seek, okay, I need to go to see a therapist. So in general, ideally, people can go to private psychologists and say, I'm not feeling well, just want to check up, is my mental health okay?
Yeah.
Then, that's when we can start the process. But if it's hit crisis, most probably you were in a hospital context, or maybe your loved ones were worried about you and referred you in. So there's different ways in which you can come. Right? Okay. But once you are in there, what tends to happen is that we try to see, okay, how is what you're struggling with affecting your life? But it needs to affect 3 areas of your life. So it needs to affect your work life.
Sure.
It needs to affect your social life.
Okay.
And it needs to affect your personal grooming and hygiene.
Okay.
Right? So, we all go through stress, and stress is normal, right?
Yeah.
To a certain extent, because it's a survival thing that you need to know, okay, I'm alive, I need to sort out things. So stress is normal, right? But once it starts being something that's worth diagnosing, we need to see, how is it affecting you socially? Are you withdrawing socially? Are you sabotaging your relationships socially? Are you has something changed from how you were, how you interacted with people, right? Wow. So then we start seeing, okay, maybe part of your mental health could be, there could be problems or issues there, right? Yeah. And then we move on to so that's the social aspect, work aspect. Are you now always late for work? Are you not motivated to go to work? You don't have energy for work anymore? Or you abscond from work. Some people can go days without showing up for work, and next thing they show up, and then they show up again. Yeah. So is it affecting your ability to work, your concentration? Yeah. Are you able to be present, right? Yeah. That is also an indicator.
Sure.
In terms of diagnosing. But then the third one is personal grooming and hygiene. We all take care of ourselves, right?
Yeah. That's a very interesting one.
I never thought of it.
I never thought of it as well. Because the way you present yourself in the world, right, should be, I guess, indicative of some kind of sound state of mind.
Yeah. Sure.
What happens if somebody fulfills 2 of the 3 criteria? Does that mean that they don't satisfy the purposes of the diagnosis? What happens if I'm
very good question.
Put together person, but everything else is falling apart?
Okay.
Such a good question.
It is a good question, because then it gets to the next part of my response, in terms of then duration becomes very important.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Okay, because there will be periods.
There will be periods where you just don't feel like bathing, you just gotta wake up and chill.
Yeah. I won't admit to that.
So that's pretty normal.
But you can neither confirm nor deny.
But some days, if you can go periods without bathing, not really caring how you feel. Because if you're in a depressed state, for example, it's quite hard to have a lot of other things in mind, because internally there's a lot going on, right? Yeah. So you won't even worry about how you look, if your hair's cut, if you're groomed, if you're smelling nice. So then duration becomes an important aspect. Because then, for example, with an MDD diagnosis, like major depressive disorder, it's for a period longer than 6 months. So if this has gone on longer, for a longer of 6 months, where, these aspects of your life are affected, and we're just like, no, Dumi's not the same anymore. He doesn't bath, he's not showing up for work on time, what's going on? He doesn't come to our social gatherings. Is everything okay? But that's why I'm saying self-diagnosis is not the way to go, because now you're like, I've been having this for 3 weeks, maybe there's something happening.
Yeah. WebMD, bruh.
Yeah.
Shout out WebMD, but not shout out WebMD.
Exactly. So it's really about being cognizant of this. So a professional can be able to make that diagnosis if these symptoms has persisted for a period 2 weeks, consecutively, and then after the 2 weeks, intermittently for 6 months. Then we start, so it's quite complicated. Yeah. But that's why you
need much clarity.
You need to see a professional before you diagnose. Yeah. And that's what goes into diagnosis.
Yeah. I think I want to ask, at first we thought we exhausted our stories, but I think now some of us are
No, I don't think we ever will.
I don't think now I'm starting to realize, so for example, I've shared this before on the platform that there was a period in my life, late 2019, things were falling apart, I can say. Everything that I built up was kind of falling apart. Yeah. And I went through a period that I would describe as anxiety-ridden, right? Because it seemed like all the symptoms were checking out. I was stressed all the time. Sometimes I'd even get dizzy from just how overwhelmed I was. But yeah, I don't know. And I would just... I'm not sure now if that was just pure stress or pure anxiety, because I did go and see a therapist, and to my fault, I don't even know what type of therapist. I guess he was a counselor, right? He's a guy with and this was
psychologist
close to Rosebank. There we are.
Yeah.
And then I went and I saw this guy for a couple of sessions, 2 or 3, very, very useful. But I don't know, like what was going on there. I'm not saying diagnose me, but the issue seemed to dissipate within 2 or 3 weeks. And it ended up not being as chronic as I thought it was going to be. Because when I went through that period, it was a 2 or 3 week period where I was like, I think I'm going to live with anxiety for the rest of my life. And then 3 weeks after that, gone. And since then, I haven't lived chronically with the same issue. And I think there are many people who might have experienced something like that was temporary, but then kind of ended up owning it for the rest of their lives. And to this day are convinced that they have something, again, not to deny that they might have that thing, but only a qualified person can tell you that for sure. And so it's the same thing with me, where I'm like, I try. My biggest fear was being a denialist and saying, oh, I think it's gone. But my fear was also self-diagnosing and saying, I think it's here for the rest of my life. So I'm starting to realize the importance of not self-diagnosing.
But I'll tell you that poses an interesting question, at least to my mind, because don't diagnose yourself, because you didn't go to school for 6 years and you're not a professional. But how much presence of mind about what you're experiencing do you need in order to seek the right kind of therapy?
Yo, icon. This is deep.
Sure, I think it's an important question, because we go through different things, right? Sometimes even bereavement, after a loss, and then you feel like you'll
Especially
never be
in a
okay.
pandemic, right?
Yeah, you'll never be okay again. Or in a pandemic, anxiety, that you're always in the home. And naturally, it's a change of environment, it's a change of scenery. So there will be struggles with adapting, right? So, but it doesn't mean we're going to diagnose you with adjustment disorder. Straight off the bed, because there is adjustment disorder, but there's a period of time you need that's normal to get into adjusting to certain changes in your life.
Because again, adjusting is a natural phenomenon.
It's a phenomenon, but if you're not used to a certain kind of environment, you will panic. Right, absolutely. But it takes a bit of time to adjust. So it becomes an adjustment disorder if, like I said, duration, it's longer. So going back to your question in terms of knowing what kind, I think it's really about awareness, I think, because like you said, I don't think it's everybody knows that there's different kinds of psychologists you can reach out to or find out with or whatever. But it is a matter of trying to, I suspect that I might be depressed. I'm not quite sure. That's a clinical illness, if it is. Right? So then it gives you the hint, clinical psychologist. But if you're like, I'm under stress, I don't know what's going on, I'm flustered, I need to know what to do. Then you're like, okay, maybe I should see a counseling psychologist. I need someone to talk to, right? And then if, for example, you have a phobia of flying, right? And you need to fly in the next 3 weeks. If you come to see me, right, so I work more psychoanalytically, so it's more longer term therapy, right? So I'm going to help you try and understand why is it you have the fear so that the fear can resolve. But that's long-term work, right? It's getting to the root. But now you need to fly ASAP. 3 weeks, your flight is coming. You need to learn those skills, right? Then there's a CBT psychologist. So that's called cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's more solution-focused. It's more direct. So those people are going to help you with the current problem. You won't know why you have the problem maybe in those sessions.
You'll be able to get onto the flight.
Exactly.
So without a bottle of vodka.
Right, tranquilizers, whatever. But legit, so it's one of those things that you need to do. It's a research thing. I think it's. I don't think anyone just knows about it straight off the bat. But if you do seek professional help, they should be able to advise you that what are your symptoms? Okay, they screen you with the symptoms. They're like, okay, no, I think actually, I in my capacity, I'd rather that's what I do. I'd rather refer you to a CBT than try and keep you into longer term therapy when I know it's not going to work. Right. So it's really about maybe consulting a person, and then hopefully they refer you to the right kind of professional.
So my next question, and I'm excited to ask this one because I guess we spent a lot of time conjecting about I guess the answer to the question, and because you work, you're a medical health professional in the public sector, I'm really interested to know, and I guess we all are, what are some of the signs that are affecting this generation of men from a mental illness perspective? Why are millennial men, I guess, experiencing mental illness? Because we see young men portraying and behaving in ways that, what would the correct phrase be?
I don't want to say unbecoming.
I don't want to say disturbing.
I don't want to say disturbing. I don't want to say violent. I don't want to say exactly.
That are loaded.
Exactly, and judgmental, you know.
Yeah.
But I guess we are the femicide capital of the world, right?
Yeah.
We are. That is South Africa. So
And millennial femicide, we've seen millennials.
Men our age are doing
Men
that.
our age, exactly.
and I think we're so wary to reach the conclusion that men do that because they're experiencing mental illness. So maybe speak to us about the signs that men are experiencing mental illness, and maybe locate those behaviors inside of mental illness for us.
Okay. I suppose maybe we can start with suicide rates.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, okay.
I mean, that's been a real thing for
Yeah.
most millennials. And in varsity, I know in a couple of years, there were quite a surge of suicide rates. And there was a study by SADC, so that's the South African Anxiety and Depression Group. And they were, like, the most recent study was showing that, like, in South Africa, 23 people commit suicide a day. Right? And in those 23 people who commit suicide a day, right?
That's shocking.
It's
that's
really,
shocking.
it's a real problem,
Yeah.
you know. And in those 23, actually, 20 of those are attempts, unsuccessful attempts, right?
Yeah.
So there's 23 who are successful, but in the 23 that's successful, there's 20 who attempted suicide. So it is an alarming rate in terms of just in general, right?
Sure.
But you find that most men, tend to be the people who commit suicide. So women also do, right? But men are more successful, right? And we can assume why, because you guys are more risk takers and more like quite go in there brave, and you just like, whatever you're going to do, you're dying, for example, right? So most men, we see that that pattern in suicide rates, that there is a problem, there is a problem, and there's coping. And, I think also coping is quite a big thing, because, there's healthier coping mechanisms and more destructive. But I think maybe I'll add to that as we go along. But I think in terms of that, we can just start seeing by the suicide rates that actually there is something, a call for concern.
Sure. Can we hang on that suicide point for a second? Frank, remember, I think you had sent us a documentary link on the Learning and Unlearning group. Is it the suicide rate in Kenya?
In Kenya, yeah, it was
Among
like
men.
shocking. Yes.
So there's a shocking, I don't even remember the statistic off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But like a very, very common feature in Kenyan society is male suicide. Right? Young men take their lives in Kenya all the time. I remember in this specific village, there would be suicides, maybe like 6 within 3 weeks or something.
Literally, yeah.
You know what I mean? And like 2 of them would be in the same family.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and one of the reflections that they had made in the documentary was, men feel like, because of the lack of economic opportunities, and because they've tethered their dignity
and their manhood
to provision, they feel like, let me kill myself. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's also a strong parallel with South African male society, where, especially among black men, where one, you feel like you're not providing, or you feel like you don't have the opportunity to do so, or, there are no opportunities for you, which is why we see substance abuse, bonyaup, and all those kinds of things. Man, like like from your own community work, have you been seeing that parallel where men are like, but what am I to do? This is fun. What am I to do?
The expectations of patriarchy, how do those influence mental illness?
I mean, it goes directly into toxic masculinity norms, right?
Sure.
Which are quite normed in most of our cultures, right? That men are strong, men don't cry, men are providers. Men you shouldn't show any sign of weakness, right? Because crying is weakness, not being able to provide is weakness. So I think in most cases you do get that, where you find men who are struggling with their sense of masculinity and feeling quite emasculated in their families, in their communities, because they can't work anymore. And it's actually quite sad to see, because they've internalized it so badly or so strongly that it is the cause for their depression, right?
Sure.
But more specifically, though, in millennial men, you find that because it's actually the inverse, where they prioritize work so much, right? And work becomes such a strong part of their identities that they turn to burnout quite quicker, but also get quite depressed because of how they've overemphasized their identities on this work and trying to meet deadlines and trying to get as much work as possible. And naturally, we stress. And naturally, we're going to get overwhelmed. So you find that more millennial men suffer with burnout, you know, and as well as the whole identity. They're like, I must be working, I must be advancing, I must be getting a house, I must be getting, you know, a family, and all that pressure. The gram. So you're under such that much pressure, and you do have a job.
You have a job.
You have a job.
Oh my gosh.
You have a job, but now it's the pressure of keeping that job, but making sure that you can provide for a family, you can buy a house. Like even now, I mean, COVID and everything, there's just so much stresses on the average millennial, right? And the pressure to succeed, right? So those are the kind of like things that you see that actually it's the work that's actually causing the depression, for example, or the anxiety, for example, because they're just trying to work, and then they don't take care of
meaning. Stop diminishing.
But the consequences become even more dire, where you have an unemployment rate amongst youth of close to 60%.
I was about to say, like, what's especially scary is that nowadays when you go on social media, I never realized this was a thing, because the story of varsity is that you go there, you leave, you get a job. But the number of people who are now coming out talking about, I remember one of my friends posted, we don't talk enough about leaving varsity, not getting a job, and moving back in with your parents. We don't talk enough about, and so many of them are now coming out, and they're kind of unraveling this post-varsity narrative about how life is actually supposed to go. And I was so shocked when I first started seeing that like, because again, the suicide statistics, when you look at them, can be abstract, right? Like, where do they come from? But then people start unraveling their stories, and you're like, whoa, like 5 of my friends are factually unemployed right now. People I was in varsity with.
Unemployed since graduation.
Since graduation. We're talking.
So they did everything the way they were supposed to. They went to school, they got a degree.
And now the statistics are becoming less abstract. They're becoming real. And when I look at those situations, I'm like, no, and I'm not calling this into existence, but those are the type of people we could potentially lose, right? And it's no fault of their own. It's the way the economy is set up. It's the fact that COVID came along last year. But yeah, it's weird when you start seeing it unraveling in people around us, because the narrative, I'm not saying the narrative was a lie. There are many people who leave varsity and get a job, but for a lot of people, the narrative was a dream. And when it fails, it could take their life. And I think that's really, really heartbreaking.
Sure.
And I think just to quickly add another element to that, also remember background. Childhood backgrounds as well, right? Where you come from, right? So we can all be unemployed, on the table, right? But essentially, I was going to be the hope for my family, right? But maybe for Wena, you'd have a parent who can support you during this time, right? Or somebody has more family members rallying around them, helping them, like, no, it's going to be, you will find a job, right? But because our circumstances are so different, that's why in terms of it leading to something more clinical, something more diagnosable, mental illness, could be also those kind of factors. Where do we come from? What are we faced with? What are our financial burdens? Some students, millennials mostly, especially our generation, I find, is that if you didn't qualify for NSFAS, then you're on student loans. Now you have the student loans.
Absolutely.
Massive debt on your shoulder.
Now you have this, it's adding to the stress.
So, Les, I wanted to ask you, What are some of the unique factors that contribute to mental health in men, specifically around pop culture, social media, peer pressure, and just like external factors, and like how we relate to the world and that sort of thing?
Okay, cool. So I think with that one is also quite an important, and we can go all day. I think around that.
Part 2 and 3.
Because that's our lives, really. Social media, pop culture, like it's really all consuming. It's become an extension of who we are, right? But I think maybe just to try and break it down, in terms of, where should I start? Let's start at...
Maybe social media?
Start with the gram, George.
Okay, let's do the gram.
Start with the gram. The gram is the devil, bro.
The gram gives us a lot of pressure. And most of the times it's unrealistic pressure.
Soft life.
Right?
Sabawell culture.
It's a world culture, I like that. But legit, because the thing is, no one really posts the unhappy moments.
Yes.
Or the when they're going through things. We don't see that, right? But all that we consume is positive life stories. Right? When you're scrolling, it's everything that's going well.
So dangerous.
And it's so dangerous because all of a sudden then you realize that I'm not doing as well. Right? And not because it's intentional, but because that's all you're consuming. Right? Remember the time you spend on the gram, the kind of posts you follow, people you follow. So you tend to only consume positive content about people's lives. And what that tends to do for your own self-esteem is you start to see where you lack. Right? In the men in the previous generation didn't have that problem because, I mean, social media wasn't there. But also, I think one of the other things that if Timmy, you move to Joburg and you leave me there in the Free State, right? I don't know what's going on with Tammy's life until Tammy comes back from the homeland and is like, Joburg, so. So you're not, while Tammy's in Joburg, you're not there comparing your achievements or your life story or your pace.
In real time.
In real time, right?
All the time.
I'm just gonna come back and lie to you like, Diwa! Diwa,
and what happens? Then you go back to your reality and you start trying to find how do you make means to end, right? So now our culture has brought it in our homes, in our rooms.
In our pockets.
In our pockets. You know, in the bus, in the toilet, wherever you use your phone. It's there and it's a constant reminder of what you're not achieving. And I think that is one of the major causes, firstly to self-esteem issues, but secondly to depression. Because you start to internalize some of that, right? And you start seeing, okay, but I'm not doing well, I'm feeling weak, I shouldn't go out. They're going to ask me, what am I doing? You know what I mean? They're going to ask me, where's my life? So now you start withdrawing socially because you already know, if Bongani, Letumi are there, then I already know that, Bongani has the scholarship, Tumi has this great job. Am I going to want to go out? So you start isolating.
Damn.
So you don't know if you actually went.
And I know I've done that. We've all done that. And
No, that's what it punches, eh?
Yeah, because then if you did go out, you'd realize in the conversation, maybe Bongan will say, hey guys, I've been struggling financially.
Right.
Or maybe you're going to come out and say, my boss is such a headache. I'm so unhappy. Right? But you'll never get to know that part of the story because all you saw is the credentials on LinkedIn. The interview. The announcements, right? But once that's why it's so important to stay connected to people. Social support is so important for mental health. So important because in that way you're able to keep up knowing that actually we're all going through stuff.
Then there's the inverse, like if I can say, sorry Bones.
Okay.
Like, so Bones and I would talk about this, like Instagram is toxic positivity. Then you have Twitter, which is toxic negativity. So on the one side, it's a platform that's like, yo, here we positive, here we live in life, here's this Rari, here's this Gucci, here's this thing, here's this that, manifesting my blessings. On Twitter, it's like, yo, it's okay to suck. Right? And it's okay to bring down other people. Right? Who think they're this, and it's okay to cancel these people immediately. And let's dwell on this culture of clapping back and this and this and that. You know what I mean? And then it's so funny, on the same phone, you are different people. on this one platform, you're this positive guy who's,
sharing
speaking,
your successes,
sharing your successes. On LinkedIn, you're sharing your job prospects and all those kinds of things. On Facebook, I can't say
it's more engaging.
It's a lot more engaging.
Shout out to Facebook.
Shout out to Facebook. And then you go to Twitter, right?
Yeah.
And then you go to Twitter, you're this mean machine. Because there's something about trending that is associated with being a mean machine. So
and another thing I want to add to the Twitter thing is and I think all of us have experienced this. So personally, I left Twitter. I know Tammy has, Dumi has left Twitter as well. The reason why we left it was because it got to a point where I discovered this word last year and I've been obsessed with it. It's called trauma bonding, where I realized that whenever you go on Twitter, and Lebo will clarify for us if that's an appropriate term to, because it's a popular Twitter word.
I heard Lebo go.
She might disapprove, but essentially, trauma bonding is this idea that we all go on Twitter, right? We all share our traumas, and then we amplify them and then normalize them. What I found ended up happening on Twitter is that I would read people's stories and ask myself, wait, why aren't I going through that? So I'll give you a number of examples. I remember going on Twitter and there's this one guy who I think struggles with depression. I assume he does because he spoke about meds that have been dispensed to him. And he just joked about hey, something about let's discuss not taking our meds or something like that. And he'd get retweets and people would engage him all the time. And I'd read that whoa, my depression's not that lit. What's wrong with me? I need to get my sadness and my trauma to that level.
Oh yeah, you called your friend, it's like you called your depression. Hey, I have a depression, but my depression is not that big.
Yeah,
you're just in an abusive relationship with a social media platform.
Exactly.
Misinformed by...
Exactly.
Right. And then on top of that, you'd get people, and this one really pained me because in retrospect, I was like, so much pain was unnecessary. So you get people who come from actually dysfunctional families, right? And by the way, not passing judgment on the families themselves, because all of us have our issues in our families, but people who come from really, really hard families who tweet about that and talk about just how much they hate their parents and stuff. So you end up taking that on black parents really suck. Because there was a period when we were all just trashing on black parents, some of whom really did try their best, but it was a popular thing to just be they suck, they really suck. And so what ended up happening on Twitter with me personally, and I know with these guys, you end up adopting traumas that aren't yours. So
creating pain.
Right. So yes, my parents weren't perfect, but Twitter's convinced me that my parents absolutely sucked. That they absolutely sucked.
And irredeemable.
Irredeemable because if I can cancel this famous actor, whatever, surely I should cancel my dad.
Surely I must cancel my dad. Right? If I'm going to be consistent.
And then the third one, I know I'm going on a bit too long, but this is the last one. The last one was my relationship with money, right? Because on the one hand, like Tammy said, Instagram, toxic positivity, you're always having to spend. On Twitter, there's this, Samuel culture is in such a way that people have now divorced the link between hard work, rewards, and just reality in general. And so you have a bunch of people who sub well all day and force you to also sub well all the time. And it messes up your relationship with money because you end up sub-welling things that you objectively don't even need or things that realistically you cannot attain until a certain level. So when I left Twitter and just started reading more, I'd find out things like the average person buys their first home at 30. And I was like, whoa, actually, okay, there's not that much pressure. Yep. The average millionaire only cracks it at 48, not 23, but 48. So if you're looking to build that type of wealth, it's okay that it might take 20 years. The average CEO only cracks it at 52. Okay, so I don't know, like Tammy said, that dichotomy between toxic positivity and you have to be successful at this age and toxic negativity, which is if you're not this depressed, then you're probably not even a person.
And your depression doesn't matter, right?
I think also the thing about Instagram that's particularly scary is that sure, I promise to never use the word curate because I think it's disgusting and I hate it. But like you said, we're all sharing the best aspects of our lives, right? And even if Tammy only shares the best aspect of his life once a week, and Frank does it once a week, and I do it once a week, you follow enough people, and you think people are just succeeding all the time, right? Like people just stay winning because all you see. right?
Winning.
Just winning and winning. Winning. But yeah, nah, that's
and Instagram is moments. It's not a life.
exactly.
Right? It's just capturing moments, right? So now you measure a moment in comparison to your whole life. Do you understand how that can cause anxiety, that can cause sadness and depression?
That just gave me so much perspective.
It's just a moment, right, in a person's life.
Yeah.
But, just to try and remember all the points that you guys say.
As long as you remember the duality, toxic negativity, toxic positivity.
I think,
And trauma bonding.
Oh, yes. I wanted to
Did we use that correctly?
No, well, I've never heard of trauma bonding.
So my
this is the
understanding of
first
trauma
time.
bonding is different.
Oh.
My
Okay,
understanding
let's
of
hear.
trauma bonding is you're in an abusive relationship with a person or a thing, right?
Okay.
But the relationship, you stay in the relationship because you become accustomed to the abuse, but every now and then you're rewarded with something. And then you realize, I'm actually going to stick around because you become addicted to the feeling of being rewarded.
This is why Twitter is messing up.
I was about to
Twitter,
say, I was
exactly.
going to say, this sounds like something that's pop culture terms.
Yes.
It
These are
is.
pop culture terms.
The thing is, there's absolutely...
It's on those little infographics on the...
because there's nothing wrong with sometimes... Because we run support groups.
Okay.
And when I start to think of support groups, it's people coming together with similar struggles, whether it's coping, whether it's just, anger or bereavement. You come together, you share those stories, but there's something healing in that because sometimes you're hearing other people's perspectives, but also not hearing you're not alone in what you're going through normalizes some of your symptoms in terms of trying to get through that, right?
Sure.
But I think in the way that it becomes toxic on Twitter, for example, it's so dangerous. Like, I cringe like when I see anything with suicide or depression or anything on Twitter, because I don't even want to go and look at it because it's so anxiety provoking because it's so dangerous, right? Because of, firstly, people start to self-diagnose on other people's depressions, right?
And some abstract figure, right? On his phone in his room.
Yeah, and you're like, they cutting, they what? It's similar things. You start internalizing some of that. And the thing with that is that depression looks different for everyone. So you don't have to compare how sad I am, or if that's a word, than Tammy, or how more withdrawn I am to do me than do me. Because the thing is, it won't change the fact that you're going through something that's real.
Yeah.
You're sad, right? And you are struggling because of that sadness, right? You don't want to go to work anymore. You don't want to bath anymore. You don't want to see people anymore, right? It's real. And it's real, your real experience. So some people's experience might diminish or make it seem like yours is lesser than. But the thing is that you might not be experiencing the same kind of symptoms, right? But interventions might be, okay, yes, I'm depressed, but maybe for me, at least I know I have a resource that I can access, like people around me, or that's buffering you from the I'm gonna kill myself tomorrow type of situation, right? Sure. So it's really dangerous because people then glamorize being depressed. And that's where pop culture comes in. Where I know with my little brothers, I don't want to out them or anything, but they listen to music that is quite heavy and quite depressing. And it's sang by depressed people. And I think it adds to this whole pop culture thing where there's artists like NF. I don't know if you guys know of NF. NF has a whole album called Therapy Sessions, right? And even in that, you can hear that this man is so depressed. But then there's your
Tentacion.
The abusive.
The guy that knew his girlfriend.
Yes, and
Lil Uzi Vert.
Exactly. And you hear the lyrics and it appropriates that. So I remember once, shame my poor brothers.
Hey, shout out to your brothers.
He had
We
a
had a show
status.
on Brothers.
He had a status on with one of it was a very depressing quote, like, I'm gonna kill myself and what, right? So then I checked in on him. Then he's like, no, it's from a song. I'm like, oh. Then I googled it. I was like, it is a song. But then he was like, oh, sis, it's in fashion to be depressed, to feel depressed, right?
And they're teenagers, right?
Yeah. So it's not that he's depressed. He's like, I'm fine. Whoa. But presenting a depressed persona is cool. So, right, taking pictures like you looking drunk, or taking pictures like, you've been high, or taking, or like...
the hand on the face.
The hand on the face.
That self-awareness is very interesting. That
Is
almost cynicism also.
Yes.
It's
So you need to look
interesting.
like you're suffering to be cool.
Because
Right?
what? It's supposed to show depth or...
Depth, exactly. But then the artist is really going through something real.
Yeah.
Let's not minimize.
Billie Eilish went through it. Like,
Yeah.
don't even think she did it. She did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
but
let's
we're in
not
the
even
club,
minimize
jamming.
the fact that they are probably addicted to substances, probably depressed, probably anxious,
How many times did we say that about Future?
Exactly.
It's real. It's real. Kanye, people, and he's bipolar, and how that is also quite, almost minimized or ridiculed because of what they used to, the Kanye they used to know. Right. But also mental illness does change a person.
Yeah.
It does take on those effects.
Yeah.
So now you find that pop culture then influences that maybe for some kid, like my brother, is like, nah, I'm chilled, I'm fine. But for another, it's like, oh, maybe it is really cool to slit my wrists, right? Just so I appear cool. So it's so influential. That's what I'm saying. Like, pop culture can be positive in the sense that you get people who advocate for mental health.
So you get like for Lady Gaga, you get the actual awareness, the real work,
where people are now starting to know about therapy. Like I think like series is like a Lucifer. He goes to therapy. He's a man. You see that.
Isn't he also the devil?
I was about to ask, what's the show about?
Right, but if the devil in that context
goes to
Therapy, then who are you to not go to therapy?
Who are you not to go to therapy? Right? Okay, I must
There's
issue...
someone watching that,
I must issue a disclaimer though, the nature of the therapy is not exactly how therapy goes, but it's just the concept of going to therapy.
And seeking help.
And seeking help and normalizing men seeking help, right? But also just to add to that, then there's another show, it's called In Treatment as well. It's a series. And within Treatment, it's just literally therapy sessions. It's a series on just therapy sessions. And it's so fascinating because you can see the fact that, there's men, there's children, there's people from different kinds of ethnicities, sexualities who seek therapy, right? So it normalizes, I see it. But I think also now in our context specifically, we don't see enough black men portrayed on TV seeking therapy. But it's more toxic masculinity that's being
if you see
emphasized.
a black man, there's a gun.
There's a gun, there's violence.
Or there's rapping, or
There's
rapping,
drugs,
there's
substance
muscles,
abuse,
there's women, naked women.
Everywhere, but we're not seeing those positive pictures around black men actually seeking therapy. And I think, this platform is quite useful in that, you guys can be open about your own experiences in terms of therapy or in terms of just mental health, illness, because then we need to normalize it by making it look normal, not just preaching it, but actually living it, that, no, actually I am in therapy. I in closing, like I was on a Twitter argument. That's when I decided that, what?
You're on a tour.
I was just like, let me distance myself.
Shout out to all the people on tour.
No, because I think it triggered me because this was a person who was expressing, suicidality on Twitter, right? How chronically suicidal they are and all these thoughts and what they're going through, right? So I just tweeted that, the options available to them, like seeking therapy, hotlines, just in terms of what you can do to help you in that situation. Then someone had a clap back and said to me,
Clapbacks.
right.
Clapbacks.
And was like,
that's so disgusting because you're assisting someone, right? Like that's all you're doing.
Let me clap back real quick.
And
what is there to clap back? but anyway, sorry.
But in that person, what they were saying is that like they feel like they don't want to live anymore. They don't want help or anything. That they expressed that, but I was like, no, but there are avenues available to you, right? So the clapback person was like to me, clearly you've never lived with depression. You don't understand depression. You don't you don't know what people go through, right? For you to just think that it's an easy step, or for you to just give these resources.
Hey, shut up.
Real quick.
And I was like,
nice.
I was so mind blown because like they're clapping me back as in like, no, you don't know what's going on. But I'm like, look,
not only do I know,
not do I know, but then the thing is, I know the benefit that comes with reaching out.
And
it's
here
gonna
my
be
3
hard.
degrees.
I didn't even go there because on my profile, I don't write that I'm a psychologist on Twitter. But literally, like, I was just thinking that I know the importance of reaching out and sometimes feeling like you have no options. Sometimes we assume people know what to do, but they don't know.
Exactly.
So if a person is tweeting and I don't want help, they could be implying from people close to them, but we don't know the gravity of not wanting help.
The brain is very complex, and what it wants and what it needs and its interests.
And perception as well, right? Because now you perceive that that's like, I don't want anything at all, but maybe a person doesn't know the avenues available to them, right? So in that, and that is why I did what I did. But like for this person, it's like, no, you don't know, and I'm just like, look. Actually, depression is also different in different people. You've already diagnosed this person with depression. This person was just expressing their sadness and how they don't want to go on anymore. You don't know what it means to be depressed.
Yeah, so you're also...
Who said they're depressed? Right?
You're already saying, what if this person is just sad, which is normal. Sometimes you go through periods of sadness and you just don't want to wake up. You just want to huddle in bed, right? But sometimes it's chronic where it goes on for longer and affecting those 3 fears that I was alluding to. So we don't know the gravity, right? So that's the danger of them. Now you've already diagnosed this person with depression and the danger in that, right? Because then it's different. And also expressing suicidality doesn't always mean the person is depressed. That's another myth. Yes.
Okay.
That's extremely interesting.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that for a second.
Because immediately what trends when somebody commits suicide, everybody's like, oh, depression is real. And really, it can be a cause, right, for people who, because it's a symptom of MDD, major depressive disorder.
Okay.
But also, then sometimes it's a personality disorder. So if it's a personality disorder, depending
let's not sleep on that here,
Yeah, so if it's a personality disorder, in some instances, you're more inclined to work impulsively or to be impulsive as a personality trait.
Oh,
right?
my goodness.
So I don't want to throw out diagnoses in case of people try to Google and then they panic and they think I have a personality disorder. But I'm just like in a broad general, so that's the disclaimer I'm just saying. But you can have
more complex.
Yeah, it's more very, very common when it's a personality disorder, and it takes quite precision to diagnose a personality disorder. But for personalities, or let's say your part of the disorder is impulsivity, right? Something can go bad now, and you're like,
that's it. I'm
out.
And that's not depression; it's a personality disorder.
Exactly.
My
so then you impulsively
and a response to an isolated event.
Exactly. So it was not a prolonged event.
Sure.
But like Bongani, or you dumped your girlfriend, and your girlfriend's like, I'm dying. My life is over. That person was not depressed before that, right? But then it just feels like maybe in that moment it's overwhelmed. And with personality disorder, sometimes emotion dysregulation is a thing. So they can't regulate emotionally. It bubbles over. So in that moment, then you decide to kill yourself.
Does it scare you when you see people who aren't qualified to facilitate conversations around mental health and just say wild things on the internet?
Shoo. It really, for me, it's kind of like, that's why I watch the content with such, especially if I know that I can't do anything about it, then I try to stay away because I'm like, it's just going to cause me anxiety. But if it's platforms where I can interact, then at least we know there's a facility for discussion, because the thing is, there is misinformation about mental health across borders, and there's not enough awareness platforms to do that, right? But also psychology is a quite elitist thing, right? So not everybody has access, right? So it's really about, it's if there's an opportunity to engage on that, then it's much more healthier than somebody coming and say, I'm a life coach and this is it. And there's no room for discourse, because then it can cause panic to other people. And that's why even here, I'm very cautioned in exactly describing what MDD is and what exactly like which personality disorder is, because it literally can look different for different people.
Because someone might prematurely walk away with a definition and apply it.
And apply it to their life and say, that person has a personality disorder.
Sounds like me.
I'm impulsive. That must be me, right?
That's also another thing that we do.
Exactly. Kidai man. Or maybe it can impulsive. Maybe that's me, but it could be ADHD.
Yeah.
That's also a hyperactive, impulsive. So it really can be a broad number of things.
Yeah.
Right? And that's, I think, the important message. And pop culture doesn't quite allow for that. It doesn't actually translate in some of the things that we consume.
I find it so interesting. Well, two things. The first one is, now that you bring up personality disorder, there have been instances where, whether it's people that we know or famous people commit suicide, and you end up playing a very exhausting game of trying to figure out why couldn't we spot their depression. And now that you're opening up the conversation, it's becoming clear that the clinical psychology field, the clinical psychology field is so broad that there are many things that could have led to the suicide, and you spending time fretting over why couldn't we spot the depression is sometimes a futile exercise, because that might have been you're diagnosing the whole thing wrong to start with. But the second thing, just going back to the celebrities, although I think you covered it brilliantly, so I'm not really adding any new concepts, but it's just an observation I've made about especially us black men who've been boys once upon a time, and the type of things that most of us were boys, some of us are Benjamin Button, but the rest of us, I think
I was born with this, Cody.
I was born with a jawline. But what I noticed also, it's quite interesting. The rap we used to listen to when we were young was like hardcore dudes, like gangster rap. 50 Cent was, my therapist.
Me too.
You too, right? Yeah, exactly. So, and then it evolves, and the stuff that I don't know if my younger brother, because he's like 22 this year, but his generation were teenagers when the non-gangster rappers who are talking
post-Drake.
Post-Drake, right? Because Drake was in the middle. He was the guy, because Drake, I don't find him dangerous for right. And then
Tyler, the Creator.
Right. So these the newer guys, the ones who talk about their depression and stuff like that, I've noticed that we praise them for at least opening up the conversation compared to both 50 Cent and guys from the 2000s. But like you pointed out, the danger then with these guys who are opening up the conversation is the way that they're doing it. Because the way that they're doing it is they're glorifying it and not necessarily giving young boys avenues for how to deal with it. So I find it very interesting that even when hip hop has evolved, the evolution hasn't been. The evolution is just don't shoot people. But now it's something else. It's self-harm and not
There's an irresponsibility with the poetic license.
Yeah. And sorry, I just remembered with Eminem as well, right? There's a song of his Stan. I don't know if you guys have.
I remember Stan.
And there's a point in Stan where he says that I can't believe you went to go cut your wrist up for real. I just rap about it.
Yeah.
If you remember that line.
Tyler, the Creator, 48 as well.
Are more men seeking mental health assistance or seeking help, and why are they seeking help?
Okay, I think I'm actually proud in the context that I'm working in, right? I do see men seeking psychological help, and I think maybe in my previous rotations or where I used to work, majority of my patients were children or female adults, but now I'm in the community, ground level primary health, right?
So community, talk to us. What's the community? What do you mean?
So I mean, I'm in. Okay, I can't really disclose exactly.
That's fine.
But it's like
the kind of what do you mean community?
It's almost like rural, kind of remote kind of communities, right? Disadvantaged communities. Let me put it that way. And then, so in those contexts, you find that, like I said in the earlier today, that most people seek mental health services when they hit crisis, right? It's never just a thing that you find a man just coming through. Yeah. So with men, what I've noticed is that either they come through because they've been referred by a doctor. So maybe they went and the doctor I'm complaining about headaches and backaches, and they're like, there's nothing medical, it's stress. Go see a psychologist, right? But it's interesting that they do come.
It is.
Because, you can be like, I get stressed, I'm going to be fine, and I'm used to being fine. But for them to actually take up the referral, I think is quite interesting, right? Sure. So that's the one thing I've noticed. But also, in terms of families also tend to bring, so when I get couples coming in for therapy, right? Then you find out there's a lot of individual things going on, right?
Yes.
And then you start to recommend individual sessions. But because they've had some sort of of taste of mental health services, they're able to buy into the, okay, maybe it can help me, right? Because of that whole toxic masculinity, I don't need help, I'm fine, I don't cry, I don't need to talk to someone, a stranger, why, right? So I'm finding that there are more, especially millennial men, and I think it has to do with access to, you know, social media and TV. In some ways, that's how pop culture is positive, that people are actually seeing that there are different kinds of services available to them, right? And men also realizing that they can actually use these services. So I found that, in that way, men do seek the services. But also in terms of just to also, I think you also had asked why, you know, so it can be for multiple reasons, you know, whether it's stress related or mental health. Maybe they were diagnosed with bipolar mood disorder, or maybe they've already been a mental health care user in some ways, or maybe they were schizophrenic, psychosis, whatever. So in some ways, they need to heal from that trauma, right? Yes. But interesting, I've also seen a man who came in with the bereavement in terms of trauma of losing the wife, right? And how that impacted. So, I mean, there could be a variety of issues, but I think it's usually when it hits crisis. And then you find that
desperation to get help.
To get help, and not necessarily like, let me just take care of my mental health and go check in with the therapist, you know? Not necessarily like, I'm going through something and I can be strong.
How do we get more men to seek mental health assistance or mental illness assistance, and how do we get rid of the taboo?
Normalizing needing help. I think let's start there. Before even normalizing seeking therapy, normalize needing help, right? Because most men feel like, you know what, man, I can do this, you know, or
needing help in general.
Knowing that you can ask for help, right? And know that you don't have to enjoy everything on your own. Because if we just look at it, like black men in general as well are struggling because of all the, never mind the systematic racism going on, you know, in terms of providing, in terms of culturally what you're meant to be as a man. Like there's just so many layers to it where they're cracking, and it's they feel like maybe it's taboo in some ways to admit to the fact that yes, my forefathers knew how to do it. Yes, my fathers went by without talking to a therapist. Why can't I? Right?
And also, I guess to a degree, feels like you're by seeking help, you're succumbing to the situation.
You're succumbing, right? But think of it this way, mental health, this is how I like to explain or think around it, is that in the same way, yearly you need to go for checkups, like a physiological checkup, right? And it's you taking care of your body, your physical health, right? So why can't we also normalize checking up on your mental health, right? And just being like, you know, I'm realizing these certain patterns in my life and they're not making sense. Let me go talk to someone else and see if I can make sense of it for the sake of my family, for the sake of my job. You know what I mean? Not necessarily just for me in general, right? Because you can notice some things that you do that probably people have highlighted, hey, this is a bit of a toxic trait, Nyana. Like, you know, because you don't want to always carry on hurting people around you, right? You want to be a better person in some ways. But you need an objective person in some ways, whether it's the church counselor or usually people, if you consult people tell you that even in the workplace, performance review, that you just can't work in groups. You know, why is that? You struggle in teamwork. You know, so it's really about just normalizing taking care of your mental health before it gets to a point where you now have to be clinically diagnosed. Right, with the depression or anything like that. So it's just that with physical stuff, you can see your body bleed, you can see your leg broken. But with mental health, you can't see the brain bleeding. But it does bleed, you know what I mean? And not necessarily in a literal sense, but it hurts. There are wounds. Some scars stemmed from childhood. Right? And they're not going to just resolve. You know, there's a term we call ghosts in the nursery, right? Where in your previous, like growing up, you went through whatever you went through, whether traumatic or good or whatever, but there was something that you went through in your childhood, right, that affects how you relate with people. right? And that's going to affect how you're going to become a parent, right? And millennial ages is when we're becoming parents, role changes are happening. You're now becoming an adult working, you're now becoming an adult, a dad, you know,
responsible for
you're
things.
marrying, you know, you, like all those things come to the fore. So role changes are stressful. No one, I mean, there's this expectation that you should walk into them gracefully. you know, adulting, right?
But you're going to stumble. It will be messy.
It's new, right? And the thing with that is that that's when you also start to pick up things about yourself that you didn't know, right? Because you've gone through your whole life being bongani, I'm this, you know, lebuki this, you know, but then now you with a person and you realize that, damn, I didn't know that I'm like this, you know? And then it starts causing problem in the relationship. So that's could be your ghost that's coming up that from some trauma that
from the nursery.
There was no need for it to come out because you were not married. There was no need for that to be a trigger because you didn't have kids, right?
Big fact.
So now all of a sudden you're like, you start to pathologize yourself, right? But in the fact that we all have traumas that we need healing from, right? And that's important. So even when you become a parent, now you're not aware of some of the toxic things that you are employing in terms of, you know, raising your child, right? Because that's how your ghost comes up. Because you may be preoccupied in that, I don't want to be the parent that my parent was. But in doing so, you become a more anxious parent, where you're not allowing your child to also discover themselves. And, you know, I mean, those are the certain technicalities that can come through that you didn't plan on having, or you didn't even know you have, right? But now they emerge because circumstance has changed, right? So, and that's why it's important to check on your mental health.
Sure. We must do some real normalizing mental health. I'm going to ask you, gents, what did you gain from seeking help? What did you take from it?
You know what? I think I need to be very honest, man. Like if I'm listening to this conversation, I've always had the culture of talking about my feelings, right? Again, I've been very fortunate to have in some way or another have the presence of mind to understand that I need friends that are good enough to talk to these things about. But to be honest, with the exception of 1 or 2 times, right? The one time was for marriage counseling, premarital counseling, right? Which was very, very effective, but it's extremely contextual. With another time, I think I had a little bit of anxiety. Then I went to go see someone, but I didn't take that as an opportunity to weave it into my own lifestyle. So, for example, when you're speaking about mental health checks, in relation to other physiological checks, I've never actually adopted that for myself. And I think my biggest problem is that I tend to trust my own counsel. That's my biggest problem. I really do trust my own counsel. I really talk to myself a lot, like, no, this is how I need it. Okay, this is how I need it. But this is how that guy did it. This is how this guy did it.
But you also do have spiritual guidance. And
I have a lot of spiritual guidance as well, right? Right, so which helps a great deal, right? But I've never, to be honest with you, like taken on the culture of professional, mental health guidance, and I think it's something I really need to do, because there are things that, you know, even spiritually, I would have access to the answer, but maybe from a mental wisdom place, I can't open the door. The answer is there, but I'm not opening the door because I don't have the vocabulary, because I've never had the conversation in person with someone who knows what I'm going through necessarily. So it can take me much longer to get where I need to get mentally, you know, as opposed to I've seen Lebu, I went through 3 or 4 sessions, and I can even unlock even bigger spiritual goals. You see what I'm saying? So all of these things intertwine very nicely, but I think I've just never, I just need to jump on it, man. There are a great deal of things I struggle with.
I mean, I think that's still a really important perspective, because there'll be people who don't have the means to seek professional help, or I mean, I guess you're proof that like assistance exists in the public healthcare sector as well.
I'm glad about
so there's that. But I mean, even if it's not having the means to seek professional help, maybe some people might be more comfortable to seek guidance from a spiritual leader, right?
Yes.
And a little bit more reluctant to. So I think I think the perspective is important either way, and I think seeking help is seeking help.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't know anything.
No, I mean, in those we cross-refer in those networks.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
And if people really who work in those spheres, like counselors, because we have lay counselors, right?
Yes.
And who maybe for HIV testing, pre-testing, counseling, and then if there's some, they then do refer to psychologists, or maybe you seeking from pastoral care, and they were supporting you from a spiritual level, but now they realize that it's actually more clinical or something more deeper. Then they do
Pastor can actually refer you.
So
those
there
situations as well.
so there are referral networks within that. I mean, obviously in every profession there are flaws. So sometimes you find that some professionals are willing to take on more than what they qualify out of scope, not practicing in the scope of their practice of own scope? What?
Yeah.
In the scope of the expertise.
Yes, there we go.
Discipline,
Expertise. So that tends to blur this, and people then have traumatic experiences of therapy, because you do find people are listening to this and say like, I went to therapy, it didn't help me, right? So there's those kind of stuff, and that's why there's the differences in the different kinds, or just really getting in touch with someone who can refer you to somebody who's good or they can recommend, because they are, like I said, there's
which is, I guess, why seeking help wherever you can is important.
It's important.
Because you even have access to that referral
network.
You were never going to have that access.
And just also to your point in terms of access, I know that psychology is a very elitist service. So most times you find that, the people in the more like who don't have the resources are not able to access the help, right?
Exactly.
And in that sense, that there are ways, like I said, in the community clinics, there are psychologists that you can get, and it's free.
Yeah.
It's a free service in that way, but we have Mtonjeni Center here at Wits as well. It's free as well, because it's for the public, not just for Wits students. But
I didn't know that.
It's for the public.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. You see. So it's about really getting in touch with that SADAG. It's a call line, lifeline. It's a call.
Shout out to South Africa.
Right? But even in there, because they have counselors, if it's something that's, requires more intervention, they will refer you and really provide you with the list of people that you can access, who are in your budget, or who you can. Yeah, but medical aid does also pay but not for a lot of sessions.
Not for a lot of.
Yeah, you can also call Riaz Hotel on.
No. Tammy's wrong.
No, let's not even go there. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Frank, what about you? What have you gained from seeking assistance?
So I wanna, as my closing words to this conversation, touch on something that Lebo said. Two things. One, she said normalizing seeking help, and the second one she spoke about is this idea of not being socially connected. So the one I became aware of like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, because I started reading articles about why are millennials so lonely? Millennials are so lonely. And I was like, man, we are lonely, aren't we? And so during that period, without my intervention, our friendships generally started morphing around 2015, 16, where we started becoming a lot more emotionally involved in each other's lives. So I already was predisposed to the idea of asking for help. I've asked you for a lot of help. I've asked you for a lot of help. I've phoned you guys 2 minutes after a breakup. Straight, right? Without wasting time, just to be like, I'm not okay now. So from a friendship point, and you guys have showed up every time. So from a friendship point of view, I can attest to the importance of asking for help, because by the time I decided to see a therapist, and again, now I've realized that I didn't make it a habit because I only went for like 2 or 3 sessions. But by the time I had to go to one, there weren't any barriers. For me, it was just a case of, let me find a directory close to where I work. And I found someone, I phoned them, and I went. And that was the result of 4 years of building up this habit of just asking for help. Yes. Just like, because some of the things we've asked each other for help with are might be ridiculous, but they've trained us so that by the time we get to our crises moments,
you know how to.
Yeah, because it got to a point where I was like, I don't think Tammy and Dumi can solve this particular issue, so let me take it a notch further and actually get professional help. There was no barrier to that. So I really do want to emphasize what Lebo was saying, that like it's a habit that you need to build from a very early period. Just ask for help. Like the things we call our boys for versus the things we should be calling them for are two different things. We call them when we need a lift, when we're drunk, when this and this and that. But how many times do we call them when like, yo, dude, I just had another altercation with my parents, and this time it's gotten worse. Please come and help me, right? Once you're able to train those type of things, by the time you get to professional help, it's not a big deal. So that's been my experience. I think it was a very nice gradual thing that started with good friends, and then professional help was like the cherry on top that wasn't too difficult to access at that point. And of course, like you mentioned, money did become a thing because like end of 2019 was a very wonky year. But in those sessions that I went for, it was so helpful. And I was able to deal with the issues right in the moment. So by the time that cash became an issue, it was like, okay, at least I've worked on a couple of things. But I would encourage, as Lebo said, like, please don't let the price thing be an issue, because especially in middle-class millennial networks, the type of therapists we share are medical aid therapists. You know, the ones who charge you $1,000 per session. And
very expensive.
Very expensive. And we need to start normalizing that there are so many other people in this field like who don't charge anything at all, who can still help you. So if you're middle class, urban millennial, you live in a city, all your friends have medical aid, you might not have medical aid, or you've exhausted your medical aid at the end of the year, please broaden your scope of what type of help you're looking to get, because you shouldn't let money be the barrier.
Can I just add to that as well? That in terms of like the money, because it is an expensive treatment, right? But in terms of that as well, like, I mean, if you're going through stuff and you're coping via the bottle, if you save that money up, all those bottles, and just like, because maybe part of hitting the bottle to a point where it's abusive, it's because of the fact that you're struggling to cope. It's a more destructive coping mechanism nonetheless, but it's a coping mechanism. So if you've hit that and you're like, okay, I have a problem, you know, then you can afford to kind of save some of that money instead of, you know, drinking it up, you know, and then and prioritize. I think the issue is that mental health is not prioritized. And we go around in social media saying the government doesn't prioritize mental health. People don't, these organizations don't prioritize mental health, but you don't also prioritize your own mental health. So how do you expect your organization to prioritize it for you? If you are be saying like my agency, I have to work, there's no time, and then you burn out, right? And you don't take that time to just like time out and be like, I'm not okay, I need leave, right? I think it needs to start with us. If we prioritize our own mental health, then I think the other structures of society will start to prioritize it too. Because the system is flawed, you know what I mean? And even in public health, we're overwhelmed. But generally, it is a matter of knowing that there is access, and then you can try and utilize those avenues.
I think one way in which I'm really lucky is that seeking assistance for mental illness has always been not so much a priority, but a norm in my life. But that's more because I had a lot of developmental challenges growing up, and I think my mother was like, okay, I don't know what to do with him, and I'm desperate to do something with him, so, you know, put him in therapy. And then from the point where my father passed away, I was in therapy, and I specifically remember it doing nothing for me, right? Then when my grandmother was killed, I was in therapy. I specifically remember it doing nothing for me. But now I found a therapist who I keep putting everyone on, which is weird because now I've got the same therapist as like so many people in my life. But shucks, it's such a insightful experience. It's shocking. I think the biggest thing I've taken from it is the ability to be mindful in my actions, right? Not just acting or responding to things, but the ability to stop and think, okay, I understand where this behavior comes from. And, you know, you speak to a therapist, and I remember asking my therapist, so how does this work and what are we doing here, right? And there was he said something around psychoanalysis, and I was like, sure, I have no idea what that means,
but let's do it.
And he explained that it's about getting to, I guess, the root cause of like certain behavioral traits or emotional traits, and you know, and I was really, really skeptical at the time about what that's going to do for me, right? Like, sure, fine. Now, I mean, I can conject about what the cause of certain things is. Like, I I felt like I had the ability to do that myself. So I'm like, why am I speaking to a mental health care professional and paying so much money to do that, right? Like what? Yeah. Like when I feel like I can do it myself. What I took from it is that you can't do it yourself. You
just
really
you have the vocab.
Just because you do you even have the vocab? And it's just shocking how it's shocking, but also obvious how your experiences are what make you who you are. But what's shocking is how if the emotional growth and development of a child is stunted, we take it for granted that we grow on a continuum, right? Because our bodies grow, we grow physiologically, we become more intelligent. But we take it for granted that if we're becoming more intelligent, then we're also growing from an emotional perspective. But learning that that's the furthest thing from the truth is shocking. And I think I look at the behaviors of like men generally in South Africa, and I'm just like, I don't think people do things because they're bad people. I guess maybe sometimes people are, but I think if there's anything to be learned, if there's anything that I took from my experience, is that even the things that I consider to be bad things that I've done, I understand that they came from somewhere complex. And until you work through the complexity of the cause, nothing's going to happen.
And, I think that's just an important thing that you just said, that in terms of the work that you've done, in terms of being self-reflective in your ways and, almost thinking that, in some ways I can do it myself and all of that situation. But it's really, therapy is more about insight-orientated work, right? It's about showing you insight to those patterns that you're not quite aware of. And in some ways, like you've mentioned, that maybe you went to a therapist at a specific point of your life after somebody has just died or after a significant loss, right? It's normal that you're going to feel sad, right? It's normal that you're going to struggle to get over that. But sometimes people panic, like, someone important has died, go to therapy now. But it won't necessarily be useful because it's a normal response to a loss of that magnitude, right? Or people say, oh no, quickly. Let's,
I see.
The thing is, sometimes you need time, right? It starts becoming pathological when it exceeds the normal time, which when we do diagnose in our profession, that's like, okay, this has been going on, it's been persistent for more than 6 months or a year or 2 years, people, right? Because when you lose people and their normal reaction is that you're going to panic. Sometimes even with us, when I was working in the medical context and the doctor's like, no, we're about to amputate a leg and the patient is not okay, or we just amputated a leg and they're in crisis, they need therapy now. And I'm like, I can't administer therapy now because that's a normal reaction to anyone who just lost a leg, right? You're not going to just get up and go. So I think the awareness that I'm trying to point out here is that, look, sometimes it depends on timing, on when you do get the work, the therapy, right? Sometimes it is about finding the right therapist, right? Because sometimes I think, we do Google therapists, and then you find that, okay, in that sense, you just go, but then you don't, the experience or the expectations or how you feel doesn't change. So I think that's also something to hold in mind, that sometimes it might be a trial and error in terms of patient-therapist fit, right? So there's those complexities, but in general, some reactions to psychosocial stresses are normal, right? But it starts becoming abnormal or dysfunctional when those 3 areas that we met, it affects those areas and for significant amount of time. Then we start to panic. But after any loss, after an adjustment, you are going to freak out, you will panic, you will feel sad, but social support buffers that. And I think that's the important message I think I'd lay, that get yourself connected, whether it's in churches, whether it's as men, these platforms, talking, those things are going to really, really help, because it will form that vocabulary in terms of knowing that actually, if I'm feeling this way, I'm not okay. I can't be going on. You can't be saying, no, but my father was like this, so I'm going to be okay. Or my uncle was like this, so this means I'm coping, or I'll get to that point. But now you're not realizing that you're not your optimum self, or in some ways you're destroying more of your social circle networks, whether it's work, friendships, relationships. And you're just like, no, but so I'm going to be like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's about catching that. And usually when you have a social support network, they're able to catch that for you.
Right.
But I think also in closing, just to mention that, it's important that men do this and do a rally and normalize needing help, because there's so many women who are victims of this gender-based violence, and I think right now the popular notion is that no, there's so many rates going up in terms of gender-based violence, but there's so much of this gender-based violence that goes unreported, and that's not because of fear, as most people are like, oh, maybe women are scared or everything, but because it's normalized in some contexts. I work in contexts where literally like being beaten up by a man is normal, being emotionally abused is normal. Remember, even with emotional abuse, some people don't take it as abuse and like, oh, you're gonna leave a man because they're saying these things to you, and they want to normalize emotional abuse.
That's almost scarier than the fear.
It's scarier than the actual beating, because you're probably gonna heal, but with emotional abuse you don't heal. So you find that because emotional abuse is normalized in certain communities and physical abuse is normal, sexual assault is normalized, that you like, even without consent, it's my boyfriend, right? So those things will go undetected or unreported, not because women fear, but because men and
what
the
am I
society,
reporting? It's normal.
Right? So men really need, I think, to really normalize seeking help and just really protecting women in general, because I was saying off camera that there's women I've worked with that literally in the community I work, almost every single woman has been sexually assaulted.
Jeez.
Right? And that's a problem. And it's a main problem.
Jeez.
But I think
it is.
with millennials, I like that they're accessing platforms in which they have access to platforms which normalize therapy, which normalize mental health, and platforms like such as this one right here.
Sure. Guys, any parting thoughts? Frank?
I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm totally covered.
Even from my side, I think Label should have the last word on this one.
Yeah. And I think that might have been it.
Yeah.
Having recognized just how ubiquitous mental health issues are, how do we get young boys and men to seek help and take responsibility for their mental health? It might start with sharing stories of our own experiences, sharing the names of counselors, therapists, and psychologists, but also recommend and doing what we can to recommend seeking assistance generally, but most importantly, sharing our time and our ears to assure them that we will always give them room to be vulnerable to us. But yeah, I would like to give a big shout out to Busim Kumbuzi Powe for the digital marketing and cover art. A big shout out to Tato and Tabo for putting the podcast together so well. A big shout out to Lebo for coming through and imparting all those bars and that knowledge. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
5 stars or die.
And please remember to give us a 5-star review. If you don't leave a 5-star review, don't leave a review. And reach out to us via survey in the episode or podcast description. Thank you.